The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Candidate Explanations and Introduction. This was not supposed to be an introduction. This is not the video I set out to make. And I'm working on a series of videos, and some of you will sense a theme really quickly because I'm talking about reason and the nature of evidence, and I'm building up to a series of videos that cover succinctly, I hope, evidence for a proposition and how it's not merely just facts consistent with a particular explanation. Because we're constantly being asked, well, what evidence counts and how much evidence is enough? So I'm working on a video series that's going to lead up to kind of giving an epistemological foundation with an explanation for evidence. But also, I was going to do this video on candidate explanations. And I realized as I was putting this video together and the story that I'm getting ready to tell, that this story on its own serves as a really good introduction to candidate explanations and why we care, and it provides examples for a number of different things. So let me start with, what do I mean? When an event occurs and we want to know what caused it, we then begin an exploration to evaluate various candidate causal explanations and determine which one of those is best supported by the available evidence. So a dead body is found in a room. It could have died of natural causes, or it could have been foul play. We go through and we consider categories of candidate explanations, foul play or natural causes, in order to narrow down the search. You know, if it turns out we don't find any evidence that's consistent with natural or with foul play, then we start looking at natural causes and natural causes that we might not know. You know, was it something we can't see right away, like an aneurysm? Was it heart failure? Who knows? Then if we find that there was some substance that caused this, we might then go back to foul play, because now we found new evidence for foul play, and we can look at candidate explanations with regard to, poisoning, etc. All of that to solve the murder mystery. In the broader scientific community, when we're trying to come up with explanations for the way the world works, whether it's something that someone is doing or claiming to do, or just a natural event that's occurring, or seems to be a natural event that's occurring, we want to find out, how do we understand this? How do we explain this? So what are the candidate explanations? And from that, we tend to make a list of, here are things that we already know can cause this. Here are things that we suspect might be able to cause this. And then we also submit all of that out for peer review from others to say, hey, are we listing candidates that we shouldn't? And can you think of candidates that we should include that we've overlooked? And of course, when it comes to science, we don't get to include supernatural propositions or gods until such time as we've demonstrated why they get to be included as candidate explanations. Because science doesn't have the ability to investigate those proposed explanations, so it can't rule them in or out. And so until somebody comes up with, hey, here's why this is a candidate explanation, you just don't get to include it. I'm going to tell you a sort of paraphrased, really cool story. There's a woman, or perhaps there was, I hope she's still around, she's in her 70s, and she can smell Parkinson's disease. So we have a claim. Basically, she was at some sort of event where a doctor was speaking about Parkinson's, and she got up to say something along the lines of, hey, why do people with Parkinson's have bad smell? And the doctor, originally thought, was she saying that people with Parkinson's smell, like their ability to smell is diminished? But no, it turns out she detected, or claims to have detected, an odor. associated with Parkinson's. The quick rundown is that as soon as you hear, hey, here's this proposed thing I can do. When you consider like the James Randi Educational Foundation, when somebody claims that they can, remote view or do anything that would seem to be beyond our natural capabilities, I can astral project, I can tell you what's going on, I can diagnose you from afar. When people make claims like that, the James Randi Educational Foundation would put them to the test with $1 million prize for anybody who could demonstrate under controlled conditions that they could do exactly what they said they could do. And to be fair, a group of people would come up with a rigorous protocol to try to make sure that there could be no trickery. And I'm not remotely convinced that, I think some of the protocols that the JREF put together were weak and that there could have potentially been a chance to fool, but that doesn't matter. They already knew that. It's not like Randy and Banachek and everybody involved with that thought that they'd come up with a foolproof test. No. They understood they could be fooled. The point was to make it rigorous enough to see if they could even pass the preliminary test. Because if they passed the preliminary test, we would review the test protocol, we would design a final test, and that if they pass that, that's when they get the $1 million. And it doesn't matter if in fact the cause for their ability was supernatural or not. All that was required was for them to be able to demonstrate they could do it. Here's the backstory on this nurse. I don't want to take all day with this. She noticed a change in how her husband smelled. And some years later, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. She was also a nurse. And when she worked with people with Parkinson's, she would notice this same odor. And she doesn't realize she's smelling something that other people perhaps cannot, or that she's noticing a smell that other people are somehow, not paying attention to or oblivious. She just thinks people with Parkinson's have a particular scent. So we need to put this to the test. Let's test it. You could do a simple test. If this were being done, like in a not rigorous scientific setting, if you had like the JREF come along, you might have stand 12 people in boxes, and then, you put on a blindfold, open a flap, and stick your nose in and smell, and then tell whether or not, do I think they have the condition. They were much smarter with the testing here. Now, I'm not saying that their test couldn't have been beaten or fooled or tricked. Of course it can. But they took 12 people, 6 of whom had been diagnosed with Parkinson's and 6 who had not. And they instructed all 12 of them to wear the same plain white t-shirt for a 24-hour period, no deodorant, no nothing, just wear it, do your normal stuff, sweat, etc. Then they took those t-shirts and they cut them up, put them in baggies. The study was done double blind so that the people who were presenting the information to her and the woman who could supposedly smell had no idea which shirt belonged to whom. Interestingly, the researchers had thought that the smell was going to come primarily from the underarm because that's where we think of smell. She said that the smell was more along the top of the back and the neckline, which led researchers to already consider some possibilities of what she might be smelling. Interestingly, she got all 6 of the people with Parkinson's correctly identified. And one of the 6 people without Parkinson's, she falsely identified as having Parkinson's. So she didn't have a perfect track record on that test, but she did correctly identify everybody who had it, but she got 1 false positive. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the cool part, which is that she didn't get a false positive. That person actually had Parkinson's and had not yet been diagnosed. So they accidentally, in their test protocol, had 7 people with Parkinson's, 1 of which hadn't been diagnosed yet. And she identified all 7 of them. This information, along with the other testing that they did and everything else, confirmed that she could reliably detect an odor, or seemingly could reliably detect an odor, on people with Parkinson's prior to medical science's ability to diagnose Parkinson's. She could tell before tests could tell, because it's a degenerative illness. And by the time it's diagnosed, it's already generally too late for a number of things. So the mere fact that we found somebody who can diagnose it early means we have new options with regard to Parkinson's. Now, eventually they had her test to see if she could identify odors from other diseases as well. And to varying degrees, she identified and was able to detect odors with regard to cancer, Parkinson's, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. What if instead of being an honest nurse who said, hey, why do people with Parkinson's smell? Or smell poorly or whatever? Why do they have an odor? What if she'd have figured this out on her own and realized that other people couldn't do what she did? And so now she set up a business saying, I don't know how I can do it. I cannot explain to you how I do it. The energies just come to me. But if you are worried whether or not you have Parkinson's, come to me. I merely just give you a quick hug, a quick embrace, and I can accurately diagnose whether or not you have Parkinson's. What if she'd have done that? There's nothing about that that is untrue, and she might not even be aware that she's just smelling. She might have told herself some narrative of, oh, it's this, or I'm the only one that can do this. So it's basically like an aura, but for a nose. I have this ability, and I don't know how to describe it other than energies. There's not even anything that's necessarily deceptive about it, and yet somebody could have thought that they had a supernatural ability, when in reality they had a completely natural ability. Why can she do this? Well, as it turns out, she has hereditary hyperosmia, which means that she has a better sniffer, a better sense of smell genetically than most humans. Dogs have senses of smell that are, I think, as much as 100 million times more accurate and finely tuned and whatever for different dog breeds. But she has this, and it turns out that hyperosmia is also a symptom of a number of different illnesses and diseases, various immune diseases, Lyme disease, kidney failure. Sometimes these things can result in hyperosmia. So you can smell, you can detect scents better. So weirdly, if you get genetically lucky or unlucky with a particular illness, you might get a heightened sense of smell that can let you detect other diseases. And now I'm told that there's a swab test for Parkinson's. Based on this woman's detection of something, they can now do a swab test to look for that particular excretion that normally isn't detectable as odor. But because she was able to identify where it was on the shirt, it led to them having a test that I believe has pretty good reliability in detecting Parkinson's earlier. If you're focused on why she can do this, as if there's a reason where there was an intent to give you this ability so that you could diagnose people, that's because we have a functional view of things. Even when we look at evolution, which is merely random alterations that are either being selected for or against by the natural circumstances. Even when that's the case, we look at it as if it's a tuned function, because it's easier for our brain to understand that, oh no, this isn't just what could happen under those circumstances. This is what was intended. And that's a mistake. Why she can do this is secondary and maybe irrelevant to whether we can do it, either directly with our noses or with some machine that we can use to mimic it. Because we can take her ability and make it work well to make the world a better place for all of us, to better detect Parkinson's early, and potentially other diseases as well. So the most important thing when somebody comes forward and says, I have this ability, or I can do this, or I have this is the claim. Most important thing, step one, prove that the claim is true, that they can do what they say they can do. The James Randi Educational Foundation tested plenty of people. None of them could ever demonstrate even the effect. None of them could demonstrate beyond the rate of chance any sort of effect that they wanted to attribute to something supernatural. Here we have a person who's just an honest nurse who had a husband with Parkinson's, detected something, thought she would ask of other, hey, have you guys looked into this? Who fundamentally may have changed the world and improved the health of countless people. When with a slight shift, and not even a shift in her motivations, she could have still been a good person who was just confused and thought correctly that she could, merely by hugging people, identify whether or not they had Parkinson's. All of that could have been true. But what we have now, because of her honesty, we have a better understanding of reality. We have a better scientific understanding of reality. We can begin to seek the causes at various resolutions. When something happens, we should say, hey, is this actually an internal thing or an external thing? Is just your brain constructing something? Is this an ability that you have? Are you actually smelling, or are you seeing some clue that the rest of us could see? Is it the case that your sense of smell is as accurate with regard to Parkinson's as my sense of eyesight is as to whether or not you are currently wearing glasses? If it is that level of triviality of you detecting it, you just walk in and boom, I can smell it. Yep, you got Parkinson's, sorry. If that's something you can actually do, this is a testable, falsifiable ability. And looking for the candidate explanations is secondary to does this happen? And then B, can we replicate it? Can we find a mechanism that allows us to replicate it? Because this nice nurse is not going to be around forever. Are there other people who already can smell these things, or are there people who can be trained to smell these things? Can we get a group of people together and say, hey, let me describe this smell to you. We march different people by you, and let's see. And we train people up as diagnosticians. It's science. It is science that might look like magic because you don't understand what's going on. But as soon as you understand there's some kind of smell, all of a sudden the magic goes away and we're just doing a test. And by the way, we don't need to march everybody past your aunt who's got a really good nose. We can now swab and test. You eliminate unknown candidate explanations by limiting the scope of the testing. This is why when they were testing her, they didn't put her, there were no people that she came in contact with. She had no way of looking at their gait, their mannerisms, listening to their speech, seeing how they were dressed, anything. Did they have, spots or bruises or nothing? There's nothing to see. You're getting a t-shirt and a baggie that was worn by someone. By eliminating as many unknowns as possible, you narrow the focus to allow you to find out what the candidate explanation should be. And even though we don't necessarily know why someone specifically ended up with hyperosmia, we do at least have an understanding that that's what this is. Now, you could then say, Matt, this ability is supernatural. there is an angel that resides within her that specifically allows her to smell things that other people can't smell. It is from a metaphysical, extra spatial dimension, manipulating her nose so that she can smell those things and detect it. So you have not ruled out the supernatural, sir. And I'll remind you that once again, I did not claim that I ruled out the supernatural. I just have no justification for asserting that the explanation is supernatural. You see, we can confirm that she can, apparently by a smell, as we find no other mechanism, detect Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. If you want to claim that there's a supernatural component to it, you are now the one who has adopted a burden of proof. And if you want to say that the most reasonable explanation is that there's something supernatural, cool. But are you just calling it supernatural because you can't do it? Does the person who runs faster than you, do they have supernatural speed? The person who jumps higher than you, do they have supernatural strength? I don't know what the justification is for calling it supernatural. Extraordinary, definitely. Uncommon, definitely. But I think we should be careful with words like supernatural. And we should be grateful that this individual, rather than having a nature that would exploit people, wanted to help people, but also had a nature that cared about how to help people. They didn't want to make assertions about being able to do things that they couldn't do, or having special powers that they didn't understand. They just cared about patients and their husband and making the world a better place. Has anybody looked into this observation that I had? And it's something that could have been ignored and forgotten. She's a nurse. The doctors didn't think anything of it right off the bat. Yeah, nope, don't know anything about that. And don't get me wrong, she could have said something that was completely ridiculous and irrelevant and would have been a waste of time to research. Figuring out what things might be worth looking into is itself a skill that we, as humans, need to develop and coordinate and be better at. If you're not able to immediately see candidate explanations for an observed phenomenon, but you have observed the phenomenon, you are in much better position than the people who are trying to explain phenomenon that have never been observed. And you will help make the world a much better place than the people who are so divorced from a reasonable process of discovery that everything becomes possible, probable, and likely to them, even if it was never possible to begin with. We'll see you all later. Thanks for tuning in. I will be back with more on evidence for a proposition and causes.